Okay, for today's read aloud, we're going to wrap up a chunk on Mollusk Island, and this is one of the more unique things about this book. And if we had a chance to interview the authors, I would ask them this question. Is usually with the Peter books we've read so far, they ping pong back and forth between locations. So we're in London, we go back to Mollusk Island, we're in Rundoon, and we go elsewhere. With this end of this book, they tend to take a huge chunk of time to go back to Mollusk Island and pretty much put Peter and Wendy on pause for multiple chapters. So that's kind of a different organization than we're used to, and I'm curious as to why they did it. I prefer the kind of ping pong back and forth instead of the huge chunks of chapters, but I'm sure they had a reason for it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to wrap up the chunk on Mollusk Island so that for tomorrow's read aloud, we will be back in London with Peter and Wendy, if you were wondering about that. Okay, so chapter 63 is called The Glowing Pool. Nereza shouted across the glowing pool, his voice echoing in the cave. "Tell them to hurry, it's taken too long." Cheeky O'Neill only grunted. There was nothing he could do to speed up the process. The men were working underwater in gold suits and breathing through tubes, which was hard enough. But on top of that, they had to do everything by feel. The brilliant light underwater was forcing them to keep their eyes closed. They had to feel around blindly for star stuff, then use gold buckets to scoop it up and pour it into the gold-lined chest that had been lowered to the bottom. From time to time, they surfaced to rest and report their progress. Despite Nereza's worries, they were doing well. They believed they had gotten most of the star stuff off the bottom, and the chest was 3/4 full. And the divers felt great. So did Cheeky O'Neill. The other men in the cave, all except Nereza. The star-stuffed waters had laced their spirits and lifted them and erased their aches, filled them with energy. O'Neill marveled at its powers. Nereza had warned him, however, that any man who was exposed directly to the star stuff without the protection of a gold suit would die within seconds. The men were to make absolutely certain that the chests were securely shut before they hauled it up from the bottom of the pool. From the looks of things, that time would be soon, and the underwater glow had dimmed considerably. O'Neill looked across at Nereza. The captain and the people who'd hired him had gone to enormous efforts and expense to get the star stuff. The chest alone must have cost a fortune to build. O'Neill wondered what this star stuff would be worth and how a man like him might use it. It was something to keep in mind. And chapter 64 is called An Awful Scream. Nibs crept through the jungle, approaching the cave from the opposite side of where the children were tied up. He waited until the guard was facing away, then placed one of the foul-smelling dung lumps just outside the cave mouth. He gently tossed the other one into the cave itself. He hid behind the rocks and peered out, and by the light of the torch in the cave, he could just make out the guard. He was staring out into the rain, looking kind of bored. Then, just past the guard, Nibs saw a slim brown arm rise out of a bush and wave. Nibs took a breath. "Hey!" he shouted. The guard spun and looked at him. "Hey!" said Nibs, again staring down the path. The guard looked over at the children and tied to the tree. Seeing they were all there, he shouted into the cave. "There was another boy out here. Oh, there's another boy out here. He's on the loose." Then he took off running after Nibs. The instant the guard was gone, Shining Pearl emerged from behind the bush and ran to the other children. They started to call out, but she shushed them with a finger and pointed toward the cave. She ran to little Scallop, who was tied to, like the others, with her hands behind her back. Shining Pearl fumbled with the knot, but the wet rope felt glued into place. "I've got a knife," said Slately. "It's in my pocket." Shining Pearl reached into his pocket and pulled out a stick with a sharpened shell lashed to it. She began sawing the part of the rope attached to the tree. She heard shouts from inside the cave, and then from just below in the jungle, the sound of trees going down. She sawed frantically with the knife. The rope parted and the children were tied together. But at least they were free from the tree. "Hurry," she said, pushing them, stumbling toward the jungle. The twins had just disappeared into the foliage, and Shining Pearl was about to follow them when she realized she had dropped the starfish. She turned and saw it lying near the cave mouth. She ran over, picked it up, and turned to race back into the jungle. That's when a huge hand grabbed her by the neck. "What are you doing here?" said Cheeky O'Neill. But before she could answer, a thunderous roar filled the clearing. They looked downhill and saw the guard emerge from the jungle, running full speed toward them, with a look of utter terror on his face. And 3 seconds later, they saw why. The monster crocodile burst into the clearing, his glowing yellow eyes impossibly far apart, his massive maw open to reveal a jagged row of needle-sharp teeth the size of spears. On open ground, he moved with amazing speed. He was gaining on the guard, now in a race for his life. O'Neill didn't wait to see who won. Lifting Shining Pearl easily off her feet, he turned and ran for the cave, and from behind them came an awful scream. And that's the end of the chapter. Now, the authors do an excellent job, as usual, of describing Mr. Grin with his teeth and his eyes to really build that sense of fear. But they were nice enough to also draw a picture of the guard being chased just before he's eaten by Mr. Grin. So you'll notice he's in the foreground there, but Mr. Grin is in the background. It's another one of those really cool pictures where there's a lot to take in and see. So his expression is great, but also the way they drew Mr. Grin to let you know he was right behind him is great as well. So this spells more trouble for Shining Pearl. And chapter 65 is called Trapped. The column of warriors loped up the steep trail, single file, Fighting Prawn in the lead. The old chief gripped his spear in his right hand, and a bow and quiver of arrows were slung across his back. He ran with a steady, efficient stride. The younger warriors knew that he would not tire or rest, not with his children in danger. There was movement ahead on the trail, and without a word, the warriors melted into the jungle on either side, waiting with their spears poised. They heard children's voices. Fighting Prawn burst from the jungle and ran forward. Ahead of the trail were Little Scallop and the Lost Boys. The chief dropped to his knees in the mud and embraced his daughter. She was sobbing. He couldn't understand her. Fighting Prawn saw that except for Nibs, the children were tied together, their hands behind their backs. He used a knife and quickly cut them free, counting them. "Where is Shining Pearl?" he said. Little Scallop sobbed only harder. "The men got her," said Nibs. "She's in the cave." "O'Neill? Are you sure?" The children assured him that it was indeed Cheeky O'Neill, as well as the other 3 men who had been with them on the island, and some of the other men as well. "They brought boxes," said Slightly, "and gold suits." "So they were never shipwrecked at all," said Fighting Prawn. "They were after the star stuff all along. Now we know why that ship is patrolling off the village. They want to draw our attention away while the raiding party removes the star stuff." He ordered 2 of his men to take the children back to the village. Then he and the other warriors hurried up the path, and when they were near the clearing, they were met by bold Abalone. "They're in the cave. We can see the torches, but we can't get any closer because Mr. Grin is waiting outside. I think he got one of their men. We heard a scream, and so now he wants more." "So they're trapped in the cave," said Fighting Prawn. "Yes," said bold Abalone. "They can't escape. When Mr. Grin leaves, we can go in after them." "I wish it were that simple," said Fighting Prawn. "What do you mean?" "They have Shining Pearl." So it's that typical setup where nothing is easy. It would be great to just go in and get Cheeky O'Neill and stop them, but with Shining Pearl and Mr. Grin there, it creates a bit of a headache for Fighting Prawn. And so this will be the last chapter that we do today. It's a short one, and it's called He Seems to Want More. Nereza glared at Shining Pearl. "This is another one of the chief's daughters?" he said. "Yes," said O'Neill. "She freed the others. They escaped. That means the mollusks will be here soon." "Then we leave now. We're almost ready." He nodded toward the pool, and his men were hauling up ropes, carefully raising the chest from the bottom. It had been filled with star stuff and locked shut. The divers were stripping off their gold suits. "We can't leave now," said O'Neill. "Why not?" "Follow me." O'Neill grabbed a torch and led Nereza toward the mouth of the cave, and when they were 10 feet from it, he stopped. "Look there," he said. "What?" O'Neill took 2 more steps forward, and then they heard the growl. "What is that?" said Nereza as he saw the huge, glowing yellow eyes. "A crocodile. A very big crocodile. The natives call him Mr. Grin." "Where's the guard I posted?" said Nereza. "Inside, Mr. Grin. He seems to want more." Nereza stared at the monster, thinking of his options. He had no guns, because he didn't think he would need them. He could order one of his men to make a run for it in an attempt to lure Mr. Grin away, but he doubted any men would be fool enough to do that. "I guess we'll have to wait. It's going to go away eventually." "But by that time, the mollusks will be here, if they're not here already." Nereza thought about that, then said, "I assume the chief likes his daughter over here." "Well, yes." "In that case, she may prove useful." Okay, and that's the end of the chapter. So typically, we get to this point of high excitement, the climax of the book, which you can see the top part is what we have left. We're getting close to finishing. and things are at their most exciting. So we're going to have to figure out how everything can work out for the mollusks without anybody getting in danger. But for the time being, we're going to go back to London tomorrow. So we'll see you tomorrow for the next Read Aloud.